Welcome to the deep dive. We're really thrilled you're joining us today.
Absolutely.
Whether you are a lifelong aficionado of the romance genre or maybe someone who just, occasionally picks up a paperback at the airport.
Right. The beach reads.
Yeah, exactly. Or honestly, even if you're just a reader who is insanely curious about how best-selling fiction is actually constructed, you are in the right place.
Definitely.
Today, we are taking a magnifying glass to the actual mechanics of genre storytelling. We're going to look at the opening chapters, the prologue, and even the author biography of a classic romance narrative.
The Power of the Legendary Greek by Catherine George.
That's the one. And our mission today is to truly understand the hidden architecture of these stories. We want to look at how authors use their own lived experiences to build believable worlds, how character archetypes like the ruthless billionaire tycoon and the fiercely independent artist are instantly established.
And how tropes like power dynamics and forced proximity are deployed to basically keep you hooked from page one.
Exactly. We want to give you those aha moments about the hidden structures of the stories we all consume. Okay, let's unpack this, starting not with the fiction itself, but with the very real woman who engineered it.
Looking at Catherine George's background is really the ideal starting point because it completely dismantles the assumption that genre fiction is just spun out of thin air.
Right.
When we examine her biography, we see the literal blueprint for her creative engine. She was born on the border between Wales and England in a village that had both a public and a lending library.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the biography notes she was fervently encouraged to read by her mother. So right from her earliest years, we have someone who is absolutely steeped in narrative.
Developing this really intense foundational relationship with books.
Exactly. But the crucial pivot happens when she's 18. She meets her husband, and his career eventually takes them far away from the Welsh border.
All the way to Brazil.
Yes. And he wasn't just working in a standard corporate office, He was the chief engineer of a massive gold mining operation in the state of Minas Gerais.
You just have to imagine the sheer whiplash of that transition.
Oh, absolutely.
Going from a quiet mid-century village on the Welsh borders to the interior of Brazil, planted right in the middle of a massive industrial gold mining operation. I mean, the sensory overload alone would be staggering. You are suddenly dealing with extreme wealth extraction, massive logistical operations, huge power disparities between the corporate engineers and the local landscape. It feels incredibly cinematic.
It really does. And the bio explicitly mentions that this 9-year stint in Minas Gerais provided the background for several of her early novels.
It makes you wonder how much of the billionaire tycoon archetype is actually just a romanticized version of the high-stakes, hyper-masculine industrial world she was living adjacent to.
What's fascinating here is how lived experience translates to fiction. It is highly likely she absorbed the specific psychology of those environments.
Yeah.
A chief engineer of a remote gold mine operates with a level of absolute authority that really mirrors the corporate titans she later writes about. But the transition from absorbing that world to actually writing about it is where her specific discipline shows up. After 9 years, she and her husband moved back to Britain for their son's education.
Right.
She has a daughter, she's managing a household, and the bio gives us this wonderful detail. She always found time to read, even if it was only while sitting in the bath.
I love that detail.
But when she made the conscious decision to try writing, she didn't just casually start drafting scenes based on her Brazilian memories. She enrolled in a formal creative writing course.
Oh.
And then she deliberately read countless novels by Harlequin authors.
So she wasn't just reading for pleasure anymore. She was reading to basically reverse engineer the product.
Exactly. In the era she was trying to break into publishing, the Harlequin or Mills and Boon model was an incredibly tight algorithmic craft.
Right. Strict word counts.
Strict word counts, mandatory character beats, specific pacing requirements for the romantic arc. By reading countless novels in the bath, she was internalizing the architecture of the market.
That makes so much sense.
She was studying how to pace a scene, how to establish the power dynamics, how to drop in sensory details without slowing down the plot. She treated genre romance as a structural science.
And that intensive analytical preparation totally paid off. Her very first accepted novel was voted the best of its genre for that year.
Which launched a career that spanned over 60 novels. She eventually returned to the Welsh marches, but she had mastered the art of building these exotic, high-stakes worlds right from her desk.
The image of her sitting in a bathtub, tearing through paperbacks to figure out the formula for a best-selling billionaire romance is just a fantastic visual.
It really demystifies the whole process.
Yeah, behind the brooding tycoons and the dramatic boardroom takeovers is a very practical writer, figuring out exactly which levers to pull to manipulate the reader's emotions.
Yeah.
And if we want to see how she applies that disciplined architectural approach to the page, we should look at how she opens the power of the legendary Greek. How does she actually establish this high-stakes world right out of the gate?
Well, she does it by denying the reader any romance whatsoever in the opening pages. The prologue is a masterclass in establishing the male lead's core identity through sheer dominance. We are not placed in a romantic setting.
No, not at all.
We are placed in a boardroom in Athens. The physical space is described with these tall windows offering a panoramic, almost godlike view of the city.
Setting the scale immediately.
Exactly. We are introduced to Lukas Andreadis as he strides into this room with one singular purpose: to execute a hostile takeover of his grandfather's airline.
And the author makes sure we understand that Luke isn't relying on charm or bluster here.
Right. We are told he has spent weeks in secret, painstaking negotiations with the 11 other men on the board. The meeting we are reading is a mere formality.
He's already won.
He has already secured the victory before he even pulls out his chair. This establishes him immediately as patient, strategic, and utterly cold-blooded.
The contrast between him and his adversary in that room is incredibly stark, too.
Oh, yes.
His target is his step-grandmother, Melina Andreadis. She's sitting at the head of the table, and the author paints her with these very intense, almost theatrical brushstrokes.
She's wearing stark couture black.
Yes, and she has this signature mane of ringlets that riot around an aging face. The text tells us she directs a look of absolute venom at Luke, a look that should have turned him to stone where he stood.
Phrasing is so deliberate.
It really is. She literally sweeps what the author calls a basilisk stare over the men at the table as she forbids the takeover and calls Luke a playboy.
And we have to look closely at how Luke absorbs that attack. The author describes his face as being as blank as a Greek theater mask.
Wow.
He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't gloat. He just coldly informs her that her terms were already accepted by a majority vote. And then he delivers the final, crushing blow.
What does he say?
He tells her, "It was my grandfather's airline, never yours. And now it is mine. I, Lukas Andreadis, own it by right of purchase and of blood."
Oh, that is brutal.
It is a surgical strike. He strips her of her power, her legacy, and her dignity in one single sentence.
I want to pause on those specific words you mentioned earlier, though. The author uses venom turned to stone, basilisk stare, and Greek theater mask. That is incredibly loaded language. A basilisk is a mythological serpent that causes death with a single glance. Turning to stone is a direct reference to the Gorgons. Is Catherine George just adding flavor to the text, or is this a deliberate framework she's building for the character?
It is highly deliberate, and it serves as the psychological spine of the entire novel. Those aren't just colorful adjectives. They are a mythological motif planted directly in the reader's subconscious.
Okay, how so?
We learn later in the text that Luke's private island sanctuary is literally named Villa Medusa.
No way.
Yes, and even more explicitly, in the foyer of his home, he keeps a statue of the Greek hero Perseus brandishing the severed head of the Gorgon Medusa.
What?
When you connect the prologue's imagery to that physical statue in his home, you unlock how Lukas Andreadis views himself. He does not see himself as a corporate raider. He sees himself as Perseus.
He's the hero.
He is the righteous mythological hero who has patiently hunted and slain the monster Melina, who we later discover destroyed his family. He has executed a divine vengeance.
That reframes the entire billionaire trope completely. He isn't just accumulating wealth for the sake of capitalism, he's hoarding power to slay monsters.
Exactly.
But from a storytelling perspective, establishing a male lead who is that cold, that patient, and that comfortable wearing a blank theater mask creates a massive narrative hurdle.
It really does.
If he is impenetrable, how do you build a romance around him? How do you crack the armor of a guy who thinks he's a mythological hero?
You have to introduce an element that operates on a completely different frequency. You need a foil who does not care about his money, his boardroom battles, or his mythological complex.
Well,
this is where Catherine George introduces the inciting incident, and our female protagonist, Isobel James. The narrative shifts from the high-tension boardroom in Athens to the idyllic pine-clad island of Kairos.
And the author immediately establishes a stark contrast in their fundamental motivations.
Yes.
Luke is seeking isolation to revel in his corporate victory and his completed revenge. Isabel is arriving on the island seeking peace, healing, and escape.
The text mentions she is trying to outrun a dark cloud of recent bad dreams and severe stress.
She isn't a corporate shark. She's an artist.
Right, she has a fine art degree and manages a gallery. She just wants solitude and inspiration. We see her eating a simple Greek salad at Nikos Taverna.
Getting guided to a very humble little cottage called the Calypso by a local doctor named Alex Nicolaides.
She is on the exact same island as Lucas, but she is inhabiting a completely different emotional universe. She values simplicity, he values control.
So how does the author force these two opposing universes to collide?
Through a highly orchestrated, violent disruption of her sanctuary. The day after she arrives, Isobel sets out to find a quiet place to paint. She hikes down a very steep, treacherous path, only to find the main beach crowded. Seeking isolation, she spots a hidden gap in the rocks. She squeezes through this natural barrier and discovers a completely deserted, stunningly beautiful cove.
Yeah.
Catherine George leans heavily into the sensory language here to emphasize the paradise Isobel has found.
Yeah, Isabel is itching for her paints to capture the sea, which the author describes as shading from pale peridot green through aquamarine and turquoise into a deep celestial blue.
Beautiful imagery.
It is. She strips down to a pink bikini, settles under a massive rock shaped like a rampant lion, and falls asleep. She has achieved her goal. She's completely at peace.
But the visual of the rock, shaped like a rampant lion, feels ominous, like a guardian of a space she isn't supposed to be in.
Definitely.
And her peace is entirely shattered. A man on a jet ski comes roaring toward the beach, swerving away at the last possible second, laughing.
The sheer noise and the sudden intrusion trigger a primal survival panic in Isabel.
Yeah, she scrambles up the steep, jagged rocks to escape, loses her footing, and falls. The author contrasts the serene, jewel-toned sea with the sickening, visceral crack of Isabel's head against the stone as she loses consciousness.
And in the fall, her foot becomes wedged tightly into a crack in the rock. She is literally trapped in the landscape.
While she is bleeding and unconscious, the perspective shifts back to Luke. He is arriving at his private retreat via helicopter. He is anticipating a swim, a luxurious dinner, and absolute silence after his corporate war.
But from the air, he spots a trespasser on his private beach.
The text tells us he is immediately, violently furious. His mind jumps to the worst conclusions. He assumes she's either an aggressive journalist trying to get a scoop on the airline takeover or a calculating gold digger who has staged the situation to trap him.
Right, he drives his jeep recklessly to his private mooring, takes his boat, the Athena, across the water, and storms onto the beach, bellowing about trespassing.
It's only when he gets close that he realizes the intruder is unconscious, bleeding from a severe gash on her temple, with her foot wedged in the rock.
The mechanics of this scene are fascinating because it takes the classic forced proximity and damsel in distress tropes, but executes them with a terrifying power disparity.
Exactly.
It isn't a cozy snowstorm trapping them in a cabin. Isabel is wearing practically nothing, just scraps of a pink bikini. She is concussed, disoriented, and in agony, and towering over her is this massive, enraged billionaire.
And when she wakes up and tries to shrink away from him, he doesn't offer gentle comfort.
No.
He scolds her in English, telling her he has to pull her foot out and that it is going to hurt. He physically manhandles her. He yanks her wedged foot from the stone, and the pain is so intense that she passes out cold again.
Wow.
He then scoops her up like dead weight, wraps her in a towel, and drops her into his boat.
You're touching on a crucial evolution of the romance genre here. This scene owes a lot more to the Gothic romance tradition than a modern romantic comedy.
Oh, absolutely. In a Gothic setup, the heroine is often trapped in a sprawling estate at the mercy of a brooding, potentially dangerous lord. Here, the author uses extreme physical trauma to strip Isobel of her agency and place her entirely under Luke's physical control. He asserts complete physical dominance.
He navigates his boat back to his marina, transfers her to his jeep, and drives her to his fortress, the Villa Medusa.
He has performed the physical rescue, but he has done it with the demeanor of a furious captor.
If you put yourself in Isabel's shoes for a moment, it is a living nightmare. You wake up half naked on a strange beach with a head injury, your ankle is trapped, and a furious statuesque man is yelling at you and then physically yanking your injured limb.
There is nothing romantic about this initial physical contact. It is a genuine crisis.
But a narrative cannot sustain that level of hostage-like tension forever. If he just keeps yelling at an injured woman, he crosses the line from a strict, brooding alpha to an unredeemable abuser. So how does the author start to shift the power dynamic once he gets her back to the villa?
The author introduces a buffer zone through the supporting cast. Once they arrive at Villa Medusa, we meet Luke's staff, and they serve to humanize the environment.
We meet Eleni, the housekeeper, her husband Spiro, and Milos, the gardener, who also functions as ex-army security.
Right, and they are fiercely loyal to Luke, but they immediately flutter around Isobel, horrified by her injuries. They act as a moral compass, showing the reader that while Luke is acting like a tyrant, the people who know him best are capable of great warmth.
Milos rushes off to fetch the doctor.
And in a great piece of narrative full-circle structuring, the doctor who arrives by motorbike to bandage her ankle is Alex Nicolaides, the exact same friendly local who guided Isobel to her cottage the day before.
And even with the doctor there, Luke refuses to relinquish control. Dr. Alex says Isabel needs proper x-rays to ensure her skull isn't fractured.
Rather than letting the doctor handle it, Luke insists on driving her to Dr. Riga's clinic in town himself.
And this leads to a moment that completely punctures Luke's aura of invincibility. He drives his Cherokee Jeep down these tortuous, winding mountain roads with his usual aggressive, domineering panache.
But he fails to account for the fact that his passenger has a severe concussion. Isobel becomes so violently carsick that she has to beg him to stop the car, and she throws up by the side of the road.
That roadside moment is brilliant structural writing. It forces Luke to abruptly slow down. He can command a boardroom, he can fly helicopters, he can yank a foot out of a rock, but he cannot command a woman's autonomic nervous system.
Exactly. Isobel's physical fragility forces him to stop treating her like an annoying obstacle and start treating her like a vulnerable human being.
It's humiliating for her, certainly, but it breaks his momentum.
They make it to the clinic, get the x-rays, which reveal no fractures, just a bad sprain and a mild concussion, and they head back to the villa. The physical crisis is managed, which clears the stage for the psychological confrontation.
Which happens when he finally corners her in the bedroom back at the villa. He still fundamentally believes she is a trespasser with an agenda.
He demands an interview, interrogated her on why she staged this elaborate accident on his private beach.
Isobel is exhausted, her head is throbbing, her ankle is pulsing, and she has simply had enough of his arrogance. Instead of arguing, she reaches for her bag and hands over her sketchbook.
The sketchbook is her weapon of truth. Luke opens it and expects to find notes on his private life or the airline takeover. Instead, he finds highly accomplished professional drawings of the boats from her cottage and the landscape of the beach.
The visual evidence forces him to confront his own paranoia.
He realizes instantly that he is entirely wrong. She is not a journalist, and she is not a gold digger. She is exactly who she claims to be, a working artist seeking inspiration.
The hostility in the room thaws and the dynamic fundamentally shifts because Luke is put on the defensive.
Yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because in his attempt to justify his terrible behavior, he reveals the depth of his cynicism.
He tells her that he is fiercely protective of his privacy because it is practically a daily occurrence for journalists to invade his base, or for women to literally arrange to be stranded near him in the hope of a dramatic rescue.
He delivers this line with total, chilling disdain. He says, "I do not delude myself that women are attracted to me in person, only to my money."
That single line unlocks the psychological prison he lives in. His immense wealth has isolated him completely.
He views every single human interaction through a transactional lens.
He assumes everyone is running a hustle, trying to manipulate him or trying to trap him. It is a very bleak existence for a man who seemingly has everything.
But what makes Isobel the perfect romance heroine for him is how she reacts to that confession. She doesn't offer him pity. She doesn't try to coddle his billionaire angst.
She pushes back.
She absolutely skewers him. She smiles politely and asks, "And the power you use to amass it, isn't power supposed to be the ultimate aphrodisiac? You Greeks have a word for everything."
She is using his own cultural heritage to mock his ego.
And Luke, instead of getting angry, just inclines his head and replies, "The rest of the world owes a lot to us." It's this fantastic, sparkling banter.
It proves to Luke, and to the reader, that Isobel is not intimidated by his wealth or his physical size. She has intellectual teeth. She can spar with him on his level.
The author also balances that intellectual sparring with moments of deep cultural grounding to keep the story tethered to reality.
While Luke and Isobel are establishing this witty, combative dynamic, The supporting cast provides domestic warmth. Eleni, the housekeeper, comes into the room and applies a home remedy to Isobel.
Gently smoothing cool yogurt over her bruised and sunburned face.
It is a very specific, culturally authentic detail of Greek island life. It provides a sensory contrast to Luke's cold paranoia, showing Isobel that while the master of the house might be a cynical tyrant, the Villa Medusa is also a place where genuine care and traditional healing exist.
We have spent a lot of time analyzing Luke's defenses, his paranoia, his need to control, his assumption that everyone is out to get him. But for a reader to truly invest in him as a romantic lead, they need to understand why those defenses were built in the first place.
You can't just have a rich guy being a jerk because he's rich.
Right, there has to be a wound. And Catherine George delivers that wound in a scene where Luke is alone on his balcony, holding a glass of brandy, looking up at the stars.
We finally get access to his internal monologue.
We get the complete anatomy of a vengeful Greek tycoon. What is he actually thinking about out there?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the narrative, this balcony scene entirely recontextualizes the brutal corporate takeover we witnessed in the prologue. Through his memories, we learn that Lukas is not a silver spoon aristocrat who inherited his wealth easily. He is the illegitimate son of a woman named Olympia Andreadis.
His grandfather, Theo, was a terrifyingly strict, unforgiving patriarch.
When Theo discovered that his daughter Olympia was pregnant out of wedlock, he didn't hide her away. He literally threw her out on the street.
Olympia was forced to flee Athens in disgrace.
She sought refuge on the remote island of Kairos because her old childhood nurse lived there. This wealthy, highly cultured young woman ended up surviving by working in the kitchen of the local taverna just to support herself and her baby.
And as a reader paying attention to the geography of the island, that drops an incredible realization into your lap.
Yes.
The taverna where Olympia worked was owned by the Nicolaides family. That means Dr. Alex Nicolaides, the man who treated Isabel's ankle, is the son of the man who gave Luke's destitute, exiled mother a job.
And the housekeeper, Eleni, and her husband Spiro are undoubtedly part of that same tight-knit local island network that protected Olympia and Luke when the billionaires in Athens threw them away.
That is exactly the connection the author wants you to make. It explains everything about Luke's management style.
His deep, unwavering loyalty to his staff makes total sense now. He didn't just hire them off a resume. They are his chosen family. They represent the community that kept him alive.
Luke grew up in a home filled with immense love from his mother, but shattered by severe poverty. He spent his childhood working grueling odd jobs with the local fishermen after school to help support his frail mother.
He watched her sacrifice everything for him. He even watched her politely refuse the advances of local wealthy suitors, like a man named Kostas Petrides, who wanted to marry her and provide for them.
Luke absorbed all of that struggle. He grew up as the ultimate outsider, looking at the wealth that was rightfully his mother's, and he made a vow.
He vowed to exact merciless revenge on the people who orchestrated his mother's exile, specifically his grandfather Theo, and Theo's ambitious, demanding second wife, Melina.
So when we dial back to that opening scene in the boardroom where he destroys Melina's position and claims the airline by right of blood, it isn't a scene about corporate greed.
Not at all.
It is a scene about a son avenging his mother's ruined life. And his intense fury at Isobel for trespassing on his beach isn't just a rich guy being territorial about his real estate.
It stems from a lifelong, deeply ingrained psychological need to protect his sanctuary, his chosen family, and his mother's memory from the corrupting influence of outsiders.
I think it's vital to unpack why readers respond so strongly to this specific type of backstory. It provides total moral justification for his immense wealth and his utter ruthlessness.
The romance genre allows the reader to indulge in the fantasy of private islands, helicopters, and couture, but it alleviates the guilt of enjoying that extreme capitalism by making the hero a self-made underdog.
He didn't exploit the working class to get rich. He fought a corrupt establishment to avenge a wronged woman. He is a ruthless capitalist, but his core motivations are rooted in family honor and filial piety.
It is the perfect alchemy for a romance hero. He's dangerous to the world, but protective of his own. But achieving that lifelong goal creates a massive psychological vacuum.
Right.
As Luke stands on that balcony, swirling his brandy, he realizes that having rendered Melina utterly powerless, he feels strangely anticlimactic. The adrenaline rush that sustained him for decades is gone.
He has spent his entire adult life fighting a multi-front war, and now the war is over. He is completely victorious, but he is completely empty. He has no purpose left.
Until, of course, a stubborn, blonde British artist quite literally falls out of the sky onto his beach and absolutely refuses to be impressed by his money, his title, or his power.
Which brings us to the morning after the accident, and a sequence I like to call the art of the manipulative pivot.
A very fitting title.
Isobel wakes up the next day feeling much better. Her concussion has faded, and her singular, burning goal is to get out of the Villa Medusa and go back to the humble isolation of her cottage. She is fiercely independent.
The text describes her struggling into the bathroom, washing herself carefully, wrapping her heavily bandaged foot in a plastic bag so she doesn't get the dressings wet, and managing to pull on a simple yellow t-shirt dress.
She hobbles out onto the balcony and looks down at the pool. And Catherine George gives us a fantastic moment of the female gaze here.
She describes Luke cutting through the water like an exotic sea creature before heaving his spectacular body out of the pool to stand with his arms outstretched to the morning sun.
Isobel literally forgets to breathe. She is undeniably physically attracted to him, but she is equally determined to leave. His physical perfection does not override her need for autonomy.
While Isobel is hardening her resolve to leave, Luke is in the pool recalibrating his entire strategy. He looks up at her on the balcony and realizes that Isobel's total lack of interest in his wealth is acting like a magnet.
Her insistence on wanting to eat plain bread and cheese alone in a tiny cottage, rather than being pampered by a staff in a billionaire's mansion, makes her utterly fascinating to a man who believes everyone has a price.
He admits in his internal monologue that a great part of her attraction is her absolute immunity to his own. She is a puzzle he cannot solve with a checkbook. It's a challenge he finds impossible to resist.
So, right there by the pool, he makes a decision. He is not going to let her leave. He is going to keep her at the villa specifically to, in his words, break down the barrier she's erected.
So what does this all mean for the plot? It means the engine of the story shifts gears. Luke has to pivot from being the angry, paranoid host trying to kick an intruder out to a manipulative captor trying to figure out how to legally and socially trap her in his house.
He joins her on the balcony for coffee, dressed impeccably, and Isobel politely asks him to drive her back to the Calypso cottage. Luke flatly refuses. He starts throwing up logistical roadblocks.
He says he needs to inspect the cottage first to see if it's suitable for an injured person, and that fresh food needs to be bought.
Isobel counters every single argument with pure logic. She points out she has her crutch, she has a walking stick he loaned her, she is perfectly happy to eat salad and cheese, and she will gladly pay Eleni to buy her some groceries.
She is practically begging to escape his opulent control. She dismantles his practical excuses effortlessly.
This raises an important question regarding agency in romance novels and how authors navigate the moral gray areas required to maintain the forced proximity trope.
Luke can see that he is losing the argument. Isobel's logic is sound, and he cannot legally hold her against her will. So he changes his tactics from logistics to fear.
He invites her down for a beautifully described lunch of Garaide's Saganaki prawns and feta baked in a rich tomato sauce. And over this exquisite meal, he drops a conversational bomb.
He casually mentions that he spoke to Dr. Riga in town that morning. And Dr. Riga, allegedly, warned that after a severe fall on the head, there can be delayed complications, specifically the risk of a blood clot on the brain.
It is so incredibly diabolical. He doesn't just broadly mention a blood clot. He leans in and tells her a horribly gruesome, highly specific story about a recent local case.
He details how a doctor had to use an ordinary power drill to relieve the pressure on a young boy's brain in order to save his life after a similar fall.
Isobel physically blanches at the story. She's absolutely terrified. And then Luke immediately smooths it over. He smiles, acts perfectly reasonable, and says that since the x-rays showed no fracture to her skull, there's obviously no major risk of that happening to her.
But the doctor strongly advises she stay at the villa under observation for a few days, just in case.
And Isobel, completely rattled by the visceral imagery of a power drill boring into a skull, caves in. She agrees to stay.
From a structural standpoint, it's a fascinating narrative device. Luke is essentially holding her hostage through medical gaslighting.
He is weaponizing his authority, his access to the doctor, and her natural vulnerability to fear, all to bend her will without ever laying a finger on her.
Within the specific heightened framework of the billionaire romance genre, this is rarely framed by the narrative as villainous abuse. Rather, it's framed as a manifestation of his overwhelming, undeniable attraction to her.
He is a man who has spent his life moving board members, grandmothers, and entire airlines around like chess pieces to get what he wants. Now, he is applying that exact same strategic ruthlessness, that same capacity for calculated deception, to courting a woman. He is securing his prize.
It sets up the ultimate clash of control. Because during this lunch, we also learn why Isabel values her independence so fiercely. She reveals she's an orphan.
She was raised by her grandparents, and they have recently passed away. She has no immediate family ties left in the world. Her social isolation is just as complete as his emotional isolation.
She is a woman entirely used to managing her gallery, managing her finances, and being totally self-sufficient. She is willing to live off a starter pack of bread and tomatoes just to maintain her autonomy.
And Luke serves her exquisite, labor-intensive seafood while casually dropping terrifying medical anecdotes to trap her in his web of luxury. They are two highly independent, deeply isolated people, and the sparks are flying because neither one of them wants to cede an inch of control to the other.
That tension between her humble, fierce independence and his opulent, manipulative control is the psychological engine that will drive the entire second act of the narrative.
The physical forced proximity of the injured ankle wasn't enough to keep her there. She was willing to hobble away. So he engineered a psychological forced proximity using the threat of the power drill.
He has successfully trapped her in the Villa Medusa. The board is set, the pieces are locked in place, and the real psychological dance of the romance can finally begin.
When we step back and look at the sheer amount of narrative architecture we've uncovered today, it's incredibly impressive. We started with the real-life Catherine George, a woman reading algorithmic Harlequin novels in her bathtub in Britain, consciously drawing on her memories of living near an industrial gold mine in Brazil to understand how to build a wealthy, exotic, high-stakes world.
We saw how she translated that disciplined study into the highly structured, trope-heavy universe of Kairos. We watched her establish an incredibly alpha, emotionally impenetrable, ruthless protagonist in a corporate boardroom, only to physically drop a vulnerable, chaotic, independent artist onto his private beach to completely disrupt his perfect, hard-won isolation.
We unpacked the deep mechanics of character motivation, looking at how class, power disparities, and deep-seated familial trauma are used to morally justify the billionaire's ruthlessness.
The author masterfully turns him from a cold corporate raider into a loyal, self-made son avenging his exiled mother. And we saw how mythological motifs, like Perseus slaying Medusa, are woven subtly into the background language to elevate the emotional stakes of the story from a simple business transaction to a divine tragedy.
Every single element, from the yogurt on the sunburn to the power drill story, is a calculated load-bearing pillar in the story's structure.
It really makes you appreciate the intense craft that goes into these books. It's never just fluff. It is carefully calibrated, highly intentional emotional engineering.
And I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. In these billionaire romance stories, we spend so much time focusing on the window dressing, the extravagant wealth, the private helicopters, the jewel-toned seas, and the massive villas.
But if you look closely at the mechanics of the attraction, the real fantasy being sold to the reader isn't the money at all.
The real fantasy is a man who has the power, the ruthlessness, and the capital to control the entire world, but who is completely and utterly undone by a woman who simply isn't impressed by any of it.
The ultimate power in these narratives, in the end, isn't financial. It's the power of indifference.
It is the one thing his money cannot buy, and therefore the only thing he truly desires. The emotional leverage of a woman saying no to a man who owns everything is what truly turns the tables and makes the genre endure.
Beautifully said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed unpacking these hidden literary structures as much as we did, and we encourage you to keep your eyes peeled for these tropes, these motifs, and these power dynamics in whatever you decide to read next. Until next time.